Okay, now it says recording in progress. So this is an image, is a picture from São Paulo. You can see the very rich building together, just a wall separating, you know, the poor houses, and it's in São Paulo, okay? And I took this, I don't know anything about soccer. I'm sorry if it's somebody's soccer team. I took from the internet, but I thought it was very important so that we could see it happens all over the world in soccer games or in other games or places where people are together with a very emotional and, you know, contaminate each other with rage or whatever. So Jung says, sorry, I'm listening to someone. I don't know if all of you are, but could you just check your microphones, please? Thank you. So that's a quote from Jung, that I feed the hungry, forgive an insult, and love my enemy. These are great virtues. But what if I should discover that the poorest of the beggars and the most impudent of the offenders are all within me, and that I stand in need of the alms of my own kindness, that I myself am the enemy who must be loved? What then? I think this is a great quote from Jung's quote, okay? We should think about that. What if we discover that the enemy that we should have patience and be kind towards and love is inside each of us? So I love Matrix, okay? So that's Neo, I think everybody knows. I'm not giving spoilers, right? The beautiful image of the first movie. And I want to reflect with you all that we all want to be like Neo in Matrix, right? To overcome our weaknesses and see reality in a deeper and more truthful way, right? But what is in the way of this achievement, let's say? So just I put some slides from last class so that we can make the reasoning together. So remember that Jung tells us that the ego would be a complex of psychic facts formed by a general perception of our body and existence, and afterwards by the registers of our memory, okay? So this complex, the center of our consciousness, is formed by a general perception of our body. We are here living this material existence with our senses and trying to adapt to our reality. So we need our perceptions of the body and of our existence, and afterwards by registers of our memory. It has a powerful force of attraction of the contents of the unconscious. So I want you to pay attention because one of the questions was about psychedelics, okay, that you put in the WhatsApp group, in psychotherapy, for instance. So, and I think everybody knows because everybody's in the WhatsApp group. So pay attention to what the function of the ego, okay, and its structure actually, and the needs that we have of the ego. So it has a powerful force of attraction of the contents of the unconscious, in addition to calling to itself impressions from the outside world that become conscious upon its contact. So the ego is doing this intermediation, we could say, from the inner world, from which it attracts contents, Let's pay a lot of attention to that. And also, in addition to the getting impressions from the outside world, okay? So the ego is doing a very, very important and central task for the personality. Let's think about that. So the ego is the center of consciousness, responsible for organizing the conscious psyche, but it is not identical to it. It is not the whole of the conscious psyche, okay? It is the center of consciousness. Although it occupies a small part of the total psyche, the ego performs the basic function of watching over consciousness. So let's think again of the question of psychedelics and of us doing something to reduce the ego, okay? According to Jung, it occupies a small part of the total psyche, but the ego performs the basic function of watching over consciousness. What is not recognized by the ego, be it an idea, a feeling, a memory, a perception, images, okay, does not reach consciousness. So even if we do something to reduce the ego, if we want the contents of the unconscious to get to come to reach consciousness, we need the ego. You see the paradox, okay? So the ego is the subject of all our adaptation attempts. It selects all psychic material that enters consciousness. It's doing the selection. So you can start to reflect upon the concept or the idea that we need a strong, mature, and healthy ego, okay? Because of all of these functions that it has in the psyche, okay? Of course, one of them, as we are reading here, is selecting all psychic material that enters consciousness. It is the ego that provides the personality with identity and continuity. So another question that you guys made was that what happens when we go to spiritual realms, right? So does the ego accompany us, for instance? Of course, and we talked a little bit about Chico Xavier's, and also Divaldo has a lot of material that was channeled through them from the spiritual realms, different spirits, and they say that in the minute after death, we are exactly the same as here. Okay, you can say the minute can stretch, and we cannot say how much or how far, because time is different in the spiritual realms from all that has been channeling for different from different mediums all over the world. So it is the ego that provides the personality with identity and continuity. So this ego that I have here in my life, okay, when I go back to the spiritual realms, of course, I will still have it in the way that I have here for a while at least, okay? Because memories and all other capacities, all other personalities that I have already had in different lives, of course, in due time will come back to me. So I will have an expansion of consciousness. But in the moments after death, and these moments can be, I don't know, years in our time, the ego goes on, okay? That's the information that we have. It is through the ego that we develop the sense of existing. So in the book Personal Triumph, we saw these slides in last class, but just to develop a little further and to go back to the questions. So the conquest of consciousness is a very painful birth of the unconscious. So it's a painful birth. Let's give it credit to the unconscious, okay? Which continues to hold a significant part of the psychic contents that the ego needs and must assimilate. So Joanna is saying that the ego needs and must assimilate the psychic contents that are in the unconscious. So we are living this life, we are having this experience so that we can achieve a little bit more of this assimilation, okay? And the ego is doing the job for the whole of the psyche. So let's give credit to our egos too, in the sense of his function. So in that moment, when it becomes aware of the portentous repository and begins to express itself through it, consciousness manifests itself. So consciousness is, for Joanna, therefore, this very high value that we conquer in our evolutionary path, integrating all the patrimony of psychic contents that exists in the reality of discernment besides knowledge, of feeling in harmony with instincts, of well-directed reasoning. So I made this, I quoted and put this quote of Joseph Campbell's, how to get rid of the ego as a dictator and turn it into a messenger, a servant, and a patroller to service. That's the trick. But remember, people, that Joseph Campbell is giving in this quote, okay, like three different tasks of the ego: to be a messenger. So to be a messenger, the ego, again, has to be strong, has to be able to be the messenger, to be a servant, to serve something else that we are going to be seeing the concept later on in the course, but to serve this higher consciousness that we all have deeper in our psyche. And a patroller, like, you know, to discern the contents, how to get little by little near to them, to this contents in the unconscious. So to serve us, that's the trick. Now, a new translation from Joanna de Angelis. Oh no, this is from last class. Just a reminder. In the face of the illusion about the permanence of the somatic set, because we live like Neo was living Matrix, the illusion that he was that personality in that good life, let's say, set in which this the somatic set in which the spirit moves on earth, mistaking impressions of perenniality are fixed around everything that after all is transitory. The false idea around pleasure and the desire for self-satisfaction stimulate ambition for possession, as we saw in those first pictures, and the consequent conduct that imposes hoarding things to which it attributes exaggerate value, like money, like material possessions, like you know, a lot of things that we consume and we don't need, and then we simply don't recycle our garbage. That's awful. And then we have images like those in the beginning of the class. So I brought to you now a beautiful image of the Gennesaret Lake in Israel. Okay, I took this picture. I was there with some of you here. I don't know if you, some that were in that trip are here today, but it was a beautiful trip with very good friends, and we could go to the Gennesaret Lake, I took this picture and this one in the boat, and it's the energy is something. It's just amazing. And this, it's from Capernaum, the city of Jesus, of Peter, when he meets Peter and the other apostles. And now I told you last class, I think, about the book 2000 years ago. So I got this picture in the internet by the Spirit Emmanuel, Francisco Cândido Xavier's mentor. And on the banks of Lake Gennesaret, Publius Lentulus, it's his name when he was a Roman senator, has an encounter with Christ. Publius has gone to beseech Jesus to heal his little daughter, Flavia, who has contracted leprosy. Moved and magnetized by emotions he has never felt before, he hears the master tell him. I'm not giving a lot of spoilers. I just translated, very simple. It's a free translation. Some simple, and it's not simple, it's really very deep sentence, but it's not the whole of the meeting. I strongly hope you will, feel moved to read the book if you haven't. And it's an example of the ego, because in that personality, Emmanuel, that we all love him in Brazil, and I hope all around the world, when you read the translation, there are lots of books by Francisco Xavier that are already translated to English, but this is his personality. It's his autobiography 2000 years ago, okay? And it's his personality as Publius Lentulus. And he can't move because he's so magnetized by this meeting with this man by the lake of Gennesaret. And but he doesn't understand because he simply can't move, can't speak. He's just, very, very moved and speechless. And he hears the master tell him, "Senator, why are you looking for me? It would have been better if you had come publicly and in broad daylight, in order to learn once and for all the sublime lesson of faith and humility. You find today a point of reference for the regeneration of your whole life. It is, however, in your will to take advantage of it, or in a few millennia. If the unfolding of human life is subordinated to circumstances, you are obliged to consider that they exist from different natures, being the responsibility of the human creature to exercise the power of will and feeling, seeking to bring his/hers destiny closer to the currents of good and love for others." I think this is so beautiful, and I hope you watch again or you really read the book, because it's just, amazing. But pay attention that the Christ is telling him, if the unfolding of human life is subordinated to circumstances, you see what we are talking about, the ego has to adapt. And we have to learn in this experience. We are not here, just for a ride, just for fun. We are here in this material body to learn, okay, to expand our consciousness, to have experiences and to learn with them. So Jesus is telling Publius Lentulus that the unfolding of human life is subordinated to circumstances. So we are all obliged He says, you are obliged to consider that they exist from different natures, being the responsibility of the human creature, of each one of us, to exercise the power of will and feeling, seeking to bring our destiny closer to the currents of good and love for others. Sounds to your spirit right now a glorious minute if you manage to use your freedom so that it may be in your heart from now on a song of love, humility, and faith in the indeterminable hour of redemption within eternity. But no one will be able to act against your own conscience if you want to despise this blissful minute indefinitely. So in this kind of small sentences, I'm trying to summarize to you a beautiful, it was not actually a dialogue because Publius Lentulus couldn't speak, because he was so moved. But what a lesson, what a lesson. Every minute when we are faced with a choice of choosing if we are going to be, more loving, more humble, more faithful, if we are going to try to discern what's good and evil for ourselves, but with truth, okay, with inner courage. So that's the hour of redemption to each and every one of us. But we can choose. No one will be able to act against our own consciousness. And we can choose if we want to despise this blissful minute indefinitely or not. I hope not. I know we are not going to despise because we are all here together. So this was a picture of the Roman Forum that I took there. Okay, we all know it. Everybody that has been to Rome or seen the pictures. And then he says, see if it's not very actual. Okay, it's timeless, actually. All the powers of your empire are very weak, and all its riches very miserable. The majesties of the Caesars are the ephemeral illusions of a day, because all wise men, like all warriors, are called upon at the opportune moment to reflect on the divine justice. We can't escape. As I told you in André Luiz's book, Francisco Xavier, and books channeled, when he channels the spirit of André Luiz, it's another series, okay, another spirit. And he stays like 8 years in the Shadowlands because he was caught in the ephemeral illusions of his own greatness, because he was a very important medical person. Okay, and look what the Christ is telling Publius Lentulus. All the powers, doesn't matter, where we are born, all the powers of our supposed empires are very weak, and all its riches very miserable. Okay, and they are ephemeral illusions of a day, considering eternity. And all wise men, like all warriors, are called upon at the opportune moment to reflect on the divine justice. One day, your mighty egos will cease to exist. under a handful of miserable ashes. Your science will be transformed by the efforts of the other workers, more worthy of progress. Your iniquitous loss will be swallowed up in the dark abyss of these centuries of impiety. Look at that and see if it's not so modern, unfortunately, when we are so proud of our, whatever achievements, even individually or collective, if they are not achievements of the soul and connected to the loss of the spirit and the love for one another, they are worthless. And they will be a handful of miserable ashes when the time comes. Which time? The time of the spirit. The time when we are in an expanded consciousness, looking to all of these achievements and really seeing, like in the movie Matrix, what is behind it. Okay, the ugliness and, the bad things that the ego had so much difficulty to bring to consciousness, and that created collectively, we create this reality that for some looks so beautiful, but behind it we have people, starving or with difficult material conditions and difficult moral and spiritual conditions all over the world. Okay, so all of this and all of our iniquitous laws will be swallowed up in the dark abyss of these centuries of impiety. Because only one law exists and will survive the wreckage of man's restlessness, the law of love, instituted from the beginning of creation. That's so beautiful, I think. I'm trying to, to really make you curious to read the book, because it's really wonderful. So now it's new, in Reflecting the Soul. No, it's not new. We saw this PowerPoint last class. Just to remind you, the imperious need for survival of the ego, the fear of failing, of not getting it right, of not being considered the greatest or the best, make people create an impeding barrier to the development of the potentialities that lie latent in human beings. So now it's new, but we are in the book Reflecting the Soul, okay? The page is down below. Faced with a socially constructed ideal in some life situations, man is moved by the immature will to change something in himself. Immature, why? Because it's socially constructed ideal, okay? It doesn't come from within. So the immature will to change something in himself or herself, whether it be a desire, a thought, an emotion, an attitude, or feeling that reflects inadequacy. This conflict between what is experienced and what is idealized was wisely identified by Freud and directed him towards understanding the functioning of the personal unconscious. With the concept of the unconscious that we have already seen, one can understand that there is no way to eliminate an imperfection as an act of suppression. The most that can be achieved is to withdraw it from the conscious mind, okay? That is, from the views of the ego, but it will not really be a transformation. We are just taken out of consciousness, okay? But it's not going to lead us to real transformation. The unconscious itself moves in order to be made known, as an impulse of awareness necessary for human evolution. We've seen that, Joanna telling us exactly that. So Freud teaches that there are two ways for the ego to try to defend itself from what does not meet its ideal: repression and resistance. Resistance is the concept that we use more under when the person is under analysis. So repression consists of the movement of withdrawing something from consciousness towards the unconscious, as if seeking an introversion, okay, putting to the inner, to the unconscious inside, okay. So repression is this movement of withdrawing something from consciousness. The second resistance is the strength for the content to remain unconscious. These two movements open space for the understanding of the ego's defense mechanisms as ways for the ego to protect itself from the onslaught of the unconscious. Okay? So it is understood that it's impossible to eliminate something that is not good or adequate, whether defects or any other content that displeases the ego. We know that already. They will be led to the unconscious and their energy will be withdrawn, but they will be directed to other objects, finding another way to make themselves present. Of course, the energy, okay, will fall, will diminish from these contents, so it can goes down to the unconscious, but they will be directed, okay. They still have energy, and so they will be directed, these contents, to other objects, finding another way to make themselves present. With that, they will feed our shadows. We are going to see the concept of shadow later on, Jung's concept later on in this course. Almost all neurotic symptoms are derived from this mechanism, something that is not well within us and that finds a way to express itself. So, okay, the ego developed the mechanisms of defense so it can take out of consciousness because it's bothering, it's hurting the ego. But it's not a very good way of dealing, with what bothers us, with what hurts us, because the ego, okay, uses a lot of defense mechanisms, and what happens? The contents will find ways to express itself, usually, as Freud discovered, in neurotic symptoms, if not something worse. So in the book, The Conscious Being, Joanna says, we all need to travel towards our inner world in order to discover ourselves, disidentifying ourselves from what hides us from others and from ourselves, okay? Usually we try to, be very identified with stuff that we want to, people look at us like this way, okay? Through this mask or through this, my behavior. But my mask, my social mask, my behavior, actually, if they come from a mechanism of defense of the ego, so they are hiding us, they are hiding our true natures, okay? So Joanna is asking us to disidentify ourselves from these contents that in this way of doing things that hide us from others and from ourselves. And she says, considering ourselves in a constant process of growth, which results from lived experiences and acquired knowledge, our search for the spiritual being that we are becomes essential. Okay? So the vigilance around the traps of the ego, a skillful disguiser of purposes, constitutes a reason for us to overcome it in order to enjoy real happiness. But it's not, Joanna is not telling us to deny or to suppress the ego, you know. She says we should overcome, work in our egos, make them stronger, healthier, more mature, okay? So that we can, and we should, in this process, watch for the traps of the egos, of our egos, okay? And she calls the ego a skillful disguiser of purposes. So in this sense, the disidentification from attachments and passions, she says, appears as a decisive step in the liberation program. For this aspiration, self-love must be revised in order to be replaced by a deeper and more spiritual, meaningful love for ourselves. So she's calling our attention, not the self-love that we keep talking about, okay? She is asking us to revise this concept and to replace it by a deeper and more spiritually meaningful love for ourselves, without the selfish remnants that generate unhealthy personalisms, which lead to perfectly avoidable conflicts. If we are too personalists, you know, everything it's me, and me also. Okay, then we are going to, of course, like inflate the ego, and we are heading straight to conflicts, okay? So she's asking us to revise this self-love, to make the love for ourselves more spiritual and deeper, and without the remnants that generate unhealthy personalisms, okay? So now we are in the end of the class, but we are not going to see all of the mechanisms of defense, because the purpose is not, you know, to understand. It's not a psychology or a psychiatric class. It's a class for self-discovery. So it's just for us to have an idea. And I've put here some of the mechanisms that of defense that Joanna calls attention to in this book, The Conscious Being, okay? So projection, it is so widely used by all of us that in psychotherapy, for instance, one important part of the treatment is helping the person to identify her projections. This, one of the authors of this chapter, actually the author of this chapter, Marlon, he puts this sentence in the beginning of the explanation of projection. It is a mechanism in which the person wants to expel qualities, feelings, desires, etc., which are refused by the ego, and locate them in the other. Here, everything that is painful would be experienced as non-ego, and therefore we would need to locate it in someone else. Remember the duality. So the ego, it's what I recognize as mine. The ego, the stuff that he recognizes, allows it, the conscious to recognize as, okay, this can be in the consciousness. And everything that cannot be, for instance, something really painful or qualities or desires that the ego doesn't know how to deal with, then it's the non-ego. of course, then, okay, it's going to fall in the unconscious, but the projection mechanism that the ego use, and we use constantly, people, constantly. It's, I think, one of the basic mechanisms of defense. So we will locate it in someone else. And it's going to be this content, quality, feeling, desire, whatever, will be projected onto someone else, okay? So if the ego has to be correct and good, then the other, whoever he, she may be, will become the bearer of all the evil that I fail to recognize in myself. Remember Jung's quote from the beginning of the class. And remember, for instance, all the discussions, all no, but a lot of discussions and, and conversations that are not conversations in the social medias, okay? I want to be the one that is correct and good and smart and knowledgeable and whatever. So everything that the ego doesn't recognize as making me, my social persona, for instance, correct and good, will have to be eventually projected, okay? Especially when the ego already classifies as evil, okay, or something really bad, then I will fail to recognize in myself and project onto others. For Joanna, the projection achieves surprising reactions. Every time someone fights with exaggerated vehemence certain traits of another's character, he projects himself onto the other, transferring from the ego the negative quality that is peculiar to it, okay, to the ego. But pay attention, what Joanna is calling us to reflect upon is that every time that someone fights with exaggerated vehemence certain traits of another's character, okay, why does that another person's character would bother me so much to make within myself, to create within myself an emotional reaction of such intensity that makes me fight with the person. If I think someone has a problematic character, that's not my business. Let's say it's his or hers. Okay, I can, if I feel okay, or if I know a diplomatic way, if I'm friends of the person, or it's somebody from my family, and if the circumstances are okay, that I think the person will not defend himself or herself, well, then maybe I can say something just to help, but not if I'm in an emotional state that I feel really mad or angry at the person. No, I'm not going to be diplomatic or think of the person's health or try in a loving manner to talk to the person. No, I will fight with a exaggerated vehemence, okay? So that's why we have to pay attention. For instance, even what we answer in the social medias, what we pay attention, what bothers us. Because the answer to what's bothering us is not in the person that is saying. It doesn't matter how awful the things that the person is saying, but it's the emotional reaction is mine. So it's within myself, okay, that I have to look for it. So then the ego makes its victim the mirror in which it is unconsciously reflected, evading the acceptance of its errors and the responsibility for them. Okay? Remember the meeting by the lake of Publius Lentulus and Jesus. I wanted to bring you as an example because when you read the book, you are going to see a lot of defense mechanisms, okay? Because Publius Lentulus was very, very proud. He was a Roman senator. I think the Roman senators were only um, under the Caesar themselves, right? So he was very proud of himself, of his knowledge, wisdom. He was always right, this and that, okay? So how would he with that personality, with that ego, even understand what Jesus was telling him at that moment? But somehow he understood, because that moment in time was, I don't want to give you spoilers, because I know all of you will want to read all of Chico Xavier's books, and all of Emmanuel's lives. I think there are 4 books of his lives, and the other lives, reincarnations, following that one. But okay, so how would he understand with small ego? Doesn't matter that he was a Roman senator. Ego was small at that point. Okay, we could say that, but it's not a spoiler, because we are going to be talking about that in some classes. There was another consciousness deep within Publius Lentulus' unconscious. And we are going to be talking about that later on, okay? But that consciousness, that higher consciousness, had the memory of everything that Jesus told him in that beautiful meeting. So that it was not Publius Lentulus' ego. The ego was there, went looking for the carpenter to try to save his daughter, this and that. He was trying to be, okay, I will forget that I am a Roman senator and will talk with this carpenter because my wife, I'm giving a lot of spoilers, told me this and that. But that was still Publius Lentulus' ego, okay? So, but another consciousness was there also at that point, listening to all of the messages, okay? As I am quite sure that our egos are talking and are word with the class, if I'm going to understand or not, what can be in my consciousness, what I don't want to think about, that goes to the unconscious. But we have another conscious, our higher consciousness, that is deep within, paying attention to this class, and that I'm trying to activate to be inspired of what to tell you in this moment. Not only my ego or my persona that sometimes, have I pronunciate this word correctly? Are people understanding me? All of this is here at the same point, but also is here the consciousness that was there in the Genizere Lake, and is connecting to what was told to Publius Lentulus. So let's see in some classes which consciousness is that. So for Joanna, the projection achieves surprising reactions. Every time someone fights with exaggerated vehemence, we have already seen that, certain traits of another's character, he projects himself onto the other, transferring from the ego the negative quality that is peculiar to it, makes the other victim of a mirror image, okay? So reaction formation or compensation, as Joanna uses, when the person unconsciously replaces an unwanted or anxiety-provoking impulse with its opposite, often expressed in an exaggerated or showy way. It is an inner movement where we try to prove to ourselves and consequently to the world that we are the opposite of that affection. Thus, exaggerated attitudes in any area camouflage opposing unconscious desires. For instance, people, fanaticism, unfortunately, still up to our day, we have a lot of, fanatical people and defending a lot of causes, religions, politics, whatever, okay? So Joanna says then an excess of devotion to a cause, be whatever cause, may be, for instance, are the compensation, these excesses, to the unconscious fears to sustain it, okay? So fanaticism would result from unconscious inner insecurity. That's Joanna saying, okay? We can talk more about that, and we will talk more in other classes. So displacement, we are almost there in the end. So displacement would be transferring one's emotional burden or emotional reaction from one entity to another. This defense mechanism may be present in someone who has a stressful day at work, for instance, and then lashes out against their family at home. This is very typical, okay? There's a movie about that, lots of movies, but there's one specific, like I think it's with Michael Douglas, can't remember the name. If somebody remembers the name, please put in the chat. So projection and displacement are similar, but projection involves misinterpreting the target's motivation. We blame the other always, okay? While displacement involves misattributing one's own response, okay? It's not me, it's that it's angry, it's that person, it's that, my family, that they were already fighting when I got home, for instance. So according to Joanna, when an impulse arises that the conscious censorship forbids to present itself without reservation, for instance, an aggressive impulse, the ego produces a displacement. When a feeling of revolt or animosity is experienced against someone or something, but which the circumstances do not allow to be expressed, the ego shifts it to reactions of violence against objects that are broken. For instance, at home, I start throwing things around, or other people not involved in the problem. So this would be a displacement. Joanna says that this reaction can also result from a hostile environment at home, where the person has become accustomed to displacing the feelings he or she has cultivated in domestic life and does not want to recognize them as being of an aggressive nature. Only an attitude of self-reflection is able to awaken the individual to conscious acceptance of himself, herself, without disguise by the ego, in order to avoid displacing reactions towards others and to become able to fight against psychological disturbances. Okay? Actually, self-reflection, we are here in a self-discovery group, is what Joanna really and strongly asks of us, in different situations for different mechanisms of defense when we know them and we realize that we are using them, okay? So introjection occurs when a person internalizes the ideas or voices of other people. This behavior is commonly associated with the internalization of external authority, particularly that of parents. Introjection is an internalization of objects, we say in psychoanalysis, a form of identification in which the individual tries to match the other through the assimilation of elements of his or her personality, which may be normal, for instance, with a small child who is identifying himself or herself with the parents, or pathological. Some authors consider introjection to be the inverse of projection, with one being inwards, introjection, and the other outwards, projection. Joanna recalls that nowadays, alongside, this is the pathological introjection, okay? That nowadays, alongside countless social vices and addictions, there is the introjection of behavior models dictated by celebrities and characters from movies and television series, for instance, especially, unfortunately, the unhappy and problematic ones. We see this a lot in adolescence, unfortunately. This morbidity, she says, according, to Joanna, must be liberated, eliminating the illusions, since such escape mechanisms, despite the momentary pleasure, end up alienating the being from his, her own inner reality. Okay, we have to pay attention with whom we are identified. Oh, I love that Netflix or whatever, wherever you are looking to, to a series, for instance, or in the television, open channel, it doesn't matter. I love that series. And okay, when people say, oh, you have to look, but the character is pathological. Oh, but I love him. What? Why are you feeling so attracted to that? To see a whole series of, with the character like that. And Joanna says it's a morbidity. And that needs to be liberated, okay, because it brings illusion and it's an escape mechanism. I'm introjecting something because everybody say it's beautiful. Oh, that character is wonderful. He's bad, he murders, he does do and that. But I identified with the character because everybody says it's great. And usually it's a very charismatic actor doing because if otherwise, if the actor is awful, nobody cares and nobody's going to. Okay, so the people that write and make the series, I'm sorry if somebody's from the movies, but it's Joanna telling us that, really do smart things and bring wonderful actors, because then the character is awful and it's going to a lot, not all of people, but a lot of people will introject the behavior, especially immature egos, adolescents, and so on. So that's the last one that talks about rationalization. It is a disavowal defense mechanism which permits an individual to deal with emotional conflicts or internal or external stressors by devising reassuring or self-serving but incorrect explanations for his or her own or others' thoughts, actions, or feelings, which cover up other motives. And according to Joanna, it is the ego's most serious escape mechanism, as it seeks to justify the error through apparent fair motives, which degenerate the critical sense of moral integrity. Please pay close attention to Joanna's definition. I never saw this definition in other author, okay? Because she's saying that it seeks to justify the error through apparent fair motives, which degenerate the critical sense of moral integrity, assuming wrong and harmful postures. There is always a reason favorably crediting the person's act, even the most thoughtless and serious ones, through the reasons given, which are not legitimate. They are not legitimate. This dichotomy what we justify about ourselves and what we really are becomes a disturbing mechanism as reality is denied in favor of what is imagined. Please, I will call again of all of you to really pay attention to Joanna's definition. Joanna says that this lack of honesty as a false expression of the self becomes a cycle of the self, the personality, okay, in this sense, becomes a psychological imbalance, which ends in a loss of existential meaning. You see how harmful is this mechanism, and how a very smart, knowledgeable, intellectual, blah, blah, blah person can use this mechanism in a way that convinces many, many people, because the person is so knowledgeable that the person is not what he or she really is, okay? A lot of pathologists, you know, like psychopaths or whatever, antisocial behavior and social people use this mechanism. Okay, neurotics, of course, but, you know, a lot of pathologists. So we all have to work to be better instead of ignoring what is still shadow within ourselves and trying to justify it with rationalization, okay? So I brought again, we're finishing here, the same slide, because after everything that we've seen, I come again with the Jung's quote, "I'm not what happened to me." Let's not get caught in our personal, you know, difficulties. I am what I choose to become. Let's practice the free will that we have, we all have, as people that are trying to understand each other, and especially through the understanding of ourselves. So to love ourselves in a deeper way, in a more truthful way, with patience and understanding, so that we can love our neighbors, we can love one another, okay? Why? Because then if I can love myself, I can really love the other. Love meaning understanding, respecting, forgiving, all of those virtues taught to us for so many, many light teachers, and for to the West people, from, as we saw in Publius Lentulus, meeting with Jesus, you know, he told us all of that 2,000 years ago. And last but not least, it's an image, this bird here, I think I told you probably, it's, I think maybe other parts of the world have. We call, the name that we call, it's not a scientific name, is I've seen you well. I've seen you well. Because in Portuguese is bem te vi. The translation would be something like I've seen you well. And when I was preparing, you know, finishing this class today, I raised my head. Synchronicity. We will have Lionel Corbatting, if everything goes right, telling us about everything about synchronicity. But you know, I looked through the window, and that's a picture of this morning from my window, and the bird was there. So it's a synchronicity, and I hope you all that are here listening to me, when you know, doesn't matter where you are in the world, but we are connected in the wish that to know ourselves, and the struggle to know ourselves, and to expand our consciousness. So I hope you all have seen you well with today's class. Thank you. I will stop sharing, and I'm not quite sure. Sorry it took me longer, but I'm not sure if the recording, Fabrizio can hear us.
Should we
Okay, he
stop the
said
recording?
someone else is recording for us. Fabrizio, if you are listening to us, can we stop the recording?